Hi, folks. Foster Gamble here. So, Sunday is the 21st anniversary of the events of September 11, 2001. 9/11, a day that changed history. We did a poll last year asking people what were the main catalysts in waking you up to what's really going on. And the top three were the JFK assassination, 9/11, and the Thrive movies. So let's talk about 9/11 for a moment. How come there was no plane found at the Pentagon? Why were there no remains in the field at Shanksville, Pennsylvania? What brought down Building 7 at free fall speed when it wasn't even hit by a plane? Kind of makes you stop and think. So, what really happened? Why did it happen? Who was really behind it? Who benefited from it? And what are the implications for humanity of revealing these truths? Wars in 7 countries, cultures destroyed, trillions spent, over 1 million killed, and increased police state power authorized. So the most powerful way we could think of to commemorate this fateful day is to replay the most profound conversation I've ever had on this topic. Last year on 9/11, I sat down with David Icke, the author of The Trigger, probably the most definitive book on the history and context, what really happened on 9/11. And he's the author as well of the pivotal The Biggest Secret, one of my great heroes and one of the great truth tellers of all time. So David Icke traces out the entire history that is the context for what really happened in 9/11, going all the way back to Babylon. So if your commitment to truth is stronger than your allegiance to a particular belief system or to staying in your comfort zone, then watch this show. Deep Truth on 9/11, The Real Scheme and Science. I go 7 levels deep to start with on the facts, the evidence, and the contradictions, and then I interview the most knowledgeable conspiracy analyst on the planet. So take this opportunity, gather your friends, and enjoy the ride. If you value from what you see, and if you haven't already, check out a free trial subscription to the deep exploration and the vibrant truth community that is the Freedom Portal. Thanks. Bye for now. Hello and welcome, everyone. It's an honor to be with you, particularly on this really poignant day. Let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to be doing today, and then we'll get going. The plan is that we're going to take care of a little business and some announcements in the beginning to clarify how this is going to work. Then I'm going to spend a little time showing you some images and some video going back to the what and to some degree the how of 9/11. Then I'll bring on David Icke. It's an incredible thrill to have him with us today. And I'll bring him on to comment especially on the who and the why of 9/11, and then to connect that in with our COVID situation and the Great Reset today. What are the lessons for today that we can get from what has happened in the past? And I'm thrilled to say that David has agreed to stay on an extra half hour beyond our usual 2-hour show. And that's a lot. He's doing a ton of appearances these days, particularly around 9/11. And it's amazing that he's going to be able to spend this extra time with us, and that'll give us more time for your questions at the end. So let's start by Leandro. Why don't you come on and say hello?
Hey guys, welcome back to the Freedom Portal. For everybody that's usually with us, for those that aren't, welcome. This is a incredible conversation and show we have every Saturday. I'm grateful to be here with you, you new visitors, and we got a great show ahead of us. Super excited about it. This is an incredible opportunity to hear two legends of truth speak on 9/11 on the anniversary. It's an amazing opportunity. There's a lot of things going on that I just want to quickly mention. First of all, we have the 7-day trial going for the Freedom Portal. So for those of you that aren't already subscribers and aren't already joining us every Saturday, there's an opportunity for you to see what it's like for 7 days completely free. And that includes anytime access to Thrive 2. If you have not seen that, well, highly recommend it. It's incredible. Of course, I'm biased, but it just legitimately is incredible. Also, for anybody that has any questions in regards to the subject matter that we're talking about here today, please drop your questions in the Q&A section in Zoom if you're with us in Zoom. Also, just in the events that are totally unbiased, non-corrupt, totally not involved in the global domination agenda, censorship overlords decide to take us down on YouTube, we have a backup stream that we'll be activating that you can access by going to the bit.ly link that was in our marketing materials or your Zoom emails, and that will be dropping in the chat here. So if we happen to get taken down on YouTube, we'll be able to keep the show going, and just make sure you use that bit.ly link. Otherwise, looking forward to the show. Take it away, Foster.
Leandrew, thanks so much for all your preparation, getting this ready today and having multiple backup plans so that we can just do everything we can to get the truth out. So that's the title of today, Deep Truth on 9/11, The Real Science and Scheme. Leandrew, come on back on for a moment. I'm just curious, where were you on 9/11? I know you were born.
I was definitely born. And in fact, I was a little 13-year-old in earth science class who had no conception of like what this really meant on the grand scale, but was absolutely terrified when, of course, when the announcement was made in school, where they basically, they tried to be as gentle as they could with us students. There was like a little powwow of the teachers like talking on the phones and everything beforehand, and we could tell that there was something really bad happening. And so they eventually would reveal to us that there had been some major, terrorist attack. And at that point, I had no clue what that even meant, so it was a pretty bizarre and terrifying thing to go through as a 13-year-old.
And do you remember when you started looking at those events in a different light?
Yeah, really. Again, I was 13 at the time. The stuff didn't quite seem like it lined up or made sense, but I didn't really allow myself to go there too much. And I know from the time I was 13 to 20, I was probably still, considering a lot of that like conspiracy theory and, a lot of under a lot of that propaganda. But around the time I was 20 and started going through my my spiritual and political awakening, I started looking into documentaries like Loose Change and, Zeitgeist and some of these other documentaries. And it just really opened my eyes to like, wow, yeah, that absolutely made no sense at all. And for a while didn't know what actually happened, but it was clear to me that there is no way we could trust the establishment, the media institutions, or the government. And I know that was a common story for a lot of people. It was hands down one of the greatest awakening moments in human history.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Leandrew. Yeah, and I one of the reasons I asked is I just want to start off putting this show in the context that that we all have gone through that awakening. There was a time when we didn't understand at all what was going on, and then we began to learn, and then sometimes there's the big moments. Like 9/11 was such a turning point for literally millions, if not billions of people across the planet. So I want to be really sensitive to that in our show today, that there's a lot of savvy people in the Freedom Portal. There's a lot of savvy people tuning in. And then there's people who go, 9/11, well, what are they going to say about that 20 years later? So I welcome you all in. I welcome you to consider what we're presenting, not believe it, but just consider it. Do your own homework and allow in whatever truth you're ready for whenever you're ready for it. Okay, thanks, Leandro.
Not a problem.
Okay, one more piece of business I want to take care of is that those of you who registered early will remember that the original flyer said that that this show was going to be with both David Icke and Richard Gage, the founder and leader of the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Well, Richard is obviously not on the show today, and recent press has indicated that. And so he contacted me about a week ago, and this is our formal statement on what we learned. Richard informed us that due to organizational pressure to censor some of his views, he will not be able to participate in today's Freedom Portal conversation. Because of some comments that he made at a conference last year, comparing the false flag of 9/11 with what is happening with COVID and the vaccine, Richard has been forced to step down from his 20-year founding and leadership role in Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. It's an unfortunate sign of the times that a courageous truth seeker like Richard is being restricted from sharing his grounded and expert views on vital topics that affect us all. We at Thrive wish him continued strength and support as he finds his next role in finding and sharing the truth of what is at this critical time. Now, of course, you and I probably both had the same thought that, well, now he can participate just as an independent individual. And we talked about that. And there is an inquest called the Jeff Campbell inquest going on in the UK right now, where parents of a young man who was killed in the 9/11 events are doing a public suit against the government for not really investigating what went on that day that caused their son's death. And because of the importance of that inquest and the discovery potential that's there to actually get evidence into the record, they've asked Richard not to participate in this conversation today, just in order to secure the best chances possible of getting that inquest heard and getting that discovery out. So my personal wish is that this whole series of events liberates Richard from what David Icke calls the hassle-free zone. You know, Kimberly and I had our moments of coming out of the hassle-free zone. The hassle-free zone is where you're only talking about the comfortable, accepted stuff, so nobody's hassling you. When you get into the bigger truths and start talking about it, it can really be a hassle. I know personally, I've known Richard for over 10 years. He's an amazing man, and he's a very savvy guy. He's also a very diplomatic guy, a great leader. And so it must have been excruciating for him to stay as restricted as he's needed to in his own truth telling over the years. So I look forward to having him on at some future time. Okay, so let's get into the events of today. And for me, the very first thing, most important thing I want to do is I want to honor those who died and those who continue to suffer from these events. The thousands who were in the building, who lost friends and family, 343 firefighters who died outright as first responders, the 1 million+ people killed in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and more, and their families, the US soldiers that were lost in unnecessary wars, and the countless number affected by totalitarian measures like the Patriot Act that were put in place ever since under the excuse of this event. Perhaps the greatest way that we can honor this loss is with deep truth to keep it from happening again. So please join me with your whole being, not only your mind, but your feelings, your body, your soul, in a moment of silence. Thank you very much. Secondly, I want to be clear that real bad things often happen during false flag events. Even when an event is a fraud, like I believe 9/11 was and like COVID is, it can still cause tremendous damage. People really die. People really suffer. And oftentimes that's used as an excuse to keep us from seeing the truth behind the fraud. So, okay, what happened on 9/11? Was 9/11 an inside job? For many, it's a conspiracy savvy litmus test. I have a relative who is very savvy to this sort of thing. And he often will sit down with strangers, and the first thing he'll say is, "So, do you think 9/11 was an inside job?" Because it kind of sorts through very quickly. What is someone's sources of information? What's their ability to emotionally and intellectually handle a differing opinion? And, where can this conversation go and not go? So there's a guy that I admire a lot who just died back in June, Senator Mike Gravel from the US Senate, who played a key role in putting the Pentagon Papers into the public record. And he has said publicly, no question in my mind, that 9/11 was an inside job. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen a little bit and take you through some images and video to highlight what I call the 9/11 dirty dozen, like the dozen most egregious pieces of evidence that don't fit with the usual story. Okay, here we go. So a reminder that the purpose of this very vehicle right here, the Thrive Freedom Portal, is to provide an interactive communication opening with humanity, through which productive explorations like today, compelling media, like hopefully this will become, and effective actions that hopefully each one of us will take, can be shared to help guide us to truly thrive. The Department of Homeland Security put out this bulletin recently, identifying the top 3 potential terror threats. This is an excuse to
Foster, you're in presenter mode. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, sorry. How's that?
That's better.
Okay, so these potential terror threats are put out there as a means to try to identify truth tellers as domestic terrorists and then take what they consider appropriate action. So these were the top 3: opposition to COVID measures, claims of election fraud. Now, this kind of reads like the recent archive of shows on the Freedom Portal, because we're going into necessary truths. And then, of course, today, a 9/11 anniversary. And that's why we're doing this show with the amazing David Icke. All right, so let's dive right in. Number 1, Dick Cheney was in charge of the drills that just happened to be running on 9/11. Dick Cheney was the real power behind the boy Bush regime and a major player in the Project for a New American Century, where they wrote that all they needed was a new Pearl Harbor to impose their colonial vision on the world. Cheney was in charge of the main drill simulating that foreign attack. And then Transportation Secretary Leon Panetta said he was present in the command center when Cheney rejected the scrambling of airplanes. Okay, number 2. 2 concrete and steel skyscrapers, the North and South Tower, each one representing about 1.25 million tons of material, turned to dust in the air and fell into their own footprints at full speed, free fall speed. Nothing like this has ever happened before or since. There have been huge skyscrapers like the 2015 fire in Dubai that happened, but the building never came down. Also, the seismic signature on these buildings showed nothing like an earthquake. There was virtually no evidence of significant weight. Way less than when they brought down the Seattle Kingdom. So what's going on with this? Here's a video clip. Does that look like the weight of implosion, or does that look like an explosion? Does it look like all that steel and concrete is actually turning to dust? This is what Judy Wood calls the dustification of the Twin Towers. If you haven't read Judy's book or looked at her multiple videos, definitely check out the work of Dr. Judy Wood. So how would something like this happen? Well, we don't have Richard here to represent the science, so I'm going to touch on various things, not as an authoritative engineer or architect, but as someone who's studied it for 20 years. There were clearly explosions going on in these buildings, but even the explosions don't turn all this to dust. So I believe that it was a combination of multiple techniques, one of which was explosion, but even more importantly, some sort of directed energy weapon along the line of what John Hutchison can do with his technology that can actually dustify or melt or merge steel. Look at the dust. Here's Judy Wood giving a presentation where she does a grid here with the evidence, and then does it satisfy the criteria of different things? Mini nukes, thermite, bombs in the building, building fire, jet fuel. You know, the jet fuel does not burn at temperatures that are going to melt steel. So that one's never held up. The collapsing of the buildings has never held up. And according to the traditional NIST science. But look at this. The one thing that satisfies virtually all the criteria is a cold directed energy weapon system. It satisfies low heat, unburned paper, low seismic impact, minimal debris, bathtubs survive, material specific effects, toasted cars, high levels of tritium, 50% levels of tritium in the background. That's indicative of some sort of directed energy weapon, ionizing radiation, dustification. So this is what she means by a toasted bus. What does that? Now, those of you, particularly in California, who went through the 2018 fires out here, you know, there was a lot of anomalous stuff going on where buildings were literally cut in half, where one of it wasn't even smoke damaged and the other was completely destroyed, where cars were melted in this way. And there are numerous videos of directed energy weapons, lasers coming down out of the sky. So here's a toasted bus. Here's a toasted car. Here's a map of the toastification. This is all around the World Trade Center where you see this phenomenon, but then there's another center of it on the other side of Manhattan. What could have possibly caused that, you know, 1/2 to 3/4 of a mile away, other than some sort of directed energy weapon? Okay, to go on to the next one. Some people still don't know that a third tower fell on 9/11. This is Building 7. Building 7 dropped at free fall speed into its own footprint, despite the fact that the BBC was on record, on video. A BBC reporter was reporting on the collapse of the Building 7 while it was still standing in the background. Check that one out on YouTube. Okay, here's what Building 7 looked like. And remember, the NIST report, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, their official report was that one central column in Building 7 collapsed because of heat effects that they had never anticipated that were expanding the building. Of course, this has never happened since then either. And this was never hit by a plane. It was just hit by some debris, and there were some fires. But here's what actually happened to Building 7. So what does that? Well, once again, there's many reports from people who were running out of the building, including firefighters, saying there's explosions going on. So yes, I believe that there were explosions in the building, but the explosions wouldn't have even brought it down like this. I believe this one also was hit with a directed energy weapon. And Judy's got some amazing video of the, before it even fell, there were these massive clouds of dust streaming out of the windows. Okay, the next event was the Pentagon. So a jet supposedly this size, Boeing 757, supposedly went into the Pentagon. So something crashed into the Pentagon, that's for sure. You can see the damage there. It was said to be missing flight American Airlines 77, but no signs of a plane were actually found. No black box, no seats, no engines, no wings, no luggage, no human remains. And of course, most suspiciously, the hole in the wall had no lateral appendages, as would have been caused by the wings of a 757. In her filmed lecture, Behind the Smoke Curtain, our dear friend and amazing researcher, Barbara Honegger, reveals compelling evidence that what hit the building that day was a cruise missile painted to resemble an airliner. The FBI has not released any of the supposed 84 surveillance videotapes that would have been covering that area. The one they did release showed an explosion, but it started once the explosion was actually in process, not showing anything coming into the building. Okay, then we go to Pennsylvania, to Shanksville, where we were told that American Airlines Flight 93 was said to crash in a field. Well, the field is scarred, but investigators, even from the FAA, could find no signs of a plane. Once again, no black box, no seats, engines, wings, luggage, human remains, and no video is available. Something hit that field, probably a drone, probably a missile, but not a commercial airliner. The next item was there are numerous cell phone calls that were broadcast after the events of 9/11. But the airlines have said that in 2001, no self-reception was possible from above 5,000 feet. And those recordings have been kept under lock and key. Senator Al Franken, in his book, Lies and the Lying Liars Who Tell Them, admitted that he had been called by former New York Mayor Ed Koch and told not to go into work. He had an office in one of the towers, not to go in on the morning of 9/11. Okay, then there's the debris itself, what was left at the bottom, which was as quickly as possible hauled off to New Jersey to sites kept under security, not allowed to be investigated, and much of it was sold off for money, some to China, just as recycling material. Okay, then one more here that you probably don't know of. But as those of you who followed our work for a while, you know that I have been in contact since 2013 with the Asian dragon families in Japan, China, Philippines, and Indonesia in particular. And the Yamashita gold, a part of that gold was used supposedly to loan money to high up government officials, including George Bush Sr., in the 1990s. And it was a series of bonds that were set to come due. In other words, they had to be paid back. And it was set to come due on September 12th, 2001. On that fateful day, the Securities and Exchange Commission declared a national emergency and for the first time in U.S. history, invoked its emergency powers under Securities and Exchange Act Section 12K, easing regulatory restrictions for clearing and settling security trades for the next 15 days. These changes would allow an estimated $240 billion in covert government securities to be cleared upon maturity without the standard regulatory controls around identification of ownership. So $240 billion in securities, and these were being kept in the vaults of the brokers in the World Trade Center, and they were destroyed on September 11th. And many of the explosions were specifically in those brokerage offices. So the securities were in the vaults, and then the federal agency investigating these bonds through the Office of Naval Intelligence was in the section of the Pentagon that was destroyed on 9/11. So the Yamashita gold would become the cornerstone of the Black Eagle Fund, from which many covert operations of the U.S. intelligence would be funded. So then General Wesley Clark was invited to the Pentagon shortly after the events of 9/11. And he has this famous interview with Amy Goodman, where he says, you know, they called me in and I was walking down the hallway and this guy, this major calls me into his office and he says, Wes, look at this. He shows him this document. He says, this document says we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and then on to Iran. How did they know this before, so quickly after 9/11? Well, obviously, and many other things point to this also. A lot of this preparation was done for months and years prior to 9/11. So you see this beautiful memorial, and I love that this memorial honors those who have died and suffered related to this. But where's the third beam? Building 7 came down too. Why isn't there a third beam for Building 7? Well, maybe they don't want us to focus on Building 7. It's just too obvious. That was the big turning point for most of the people that I know who woke up around 9/11. Okay, so there has been talk for 20 years of convening a grand jury to really look in independently to 9/11. But of course, that hasn't happened yet. And the last slide I want to show here before going on to the next section of our program is that this is a quote from St. Augustine: "The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose. It will defend itself." Okay, so Now we're going to welcome David Icke on. And David, I want to give you a little introduction, particularly for those few people who might not be very familiar with who you are. First of all, I want to say that very personally, it was back in 2003 that somebody gifted me this book here called The Biggest Secret by David Icke. Well, I opened up that. First of all, I thought The Biggest Secret, that's arrogant. Then I opened it up to the introduction, and it warned me that if I was dependent on my current worldview or was not particularly emotionally able to handle new news, I might not want to read on. Then I turned the page and started hearing about all these conspirators, which were these famous politicians and bankers and so forth. And I literally threw that book down. I said, bullshit. Well, a year later, I picked up that book again and started reading, and I could not put it down. It made coherent and chilling sense out of incoherent histories and the bizarre world events that I was seeing. So David Icke's written a lot of books, and you can see them behind me here. This isn't even all of them. This is all the ones that I've read. It's most of them. He's written over 20 books. These are highly annotated. And this particular one, probably hardly anyone has actually read this all the way through. I promise you I have. It's highly annotated in the back, and it's one of the main reasons why I wanted David on today, because he's not a conspiracy theorist. He's a conspiracy analyst. There are conspiracies. They run the world, and David Icke is probably the premier analyst in the world. He was formerly a professional footballer, and he's lectured all over the world. He's been trying to wake people up for the last 31 years and endured decades of slander and abuse for his so-called conspiracy theories. With the passage of time and world events, serious researchers and observers have come to realize that this guy was right about just about everything. Now he fills auditoriums with standing room only crowds and is one of the most sought after and arguably the most important speaker on planet Earth right now. For good reason, David has been called, among many other things, the grandfather of truth. He's the single most comprehensive, most accurate researcher that I've come across. And as you know, I've looked far and wide. I don't say this very often, but I would take a bullet for this guy because of his courage, his virtue, and his cohering of critical thinking at this unprecedented time when the very survival of our species hangs on what we believe to be true. So David, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Foster. I tell you what, after that introduction, I think I'll quit while I'm ahead. It can only go down from here.
Well, I'm really honored to have you on board today, and I especially wanted you to, any comments you want to make about any of the what and how that I said you're welcome to, but especially to focus on the who and the why behind 9/11, because that's what your book, The Trigger, goes into like no one else I've ever seen. And then we'll connect it to the events of today, and then we'll really look at what are the solutions, both internally and externally, that we can that are truly viable now.
Well, when I used to do jigsaw puzzles a long, long time ago, I always wanted to, first of all, get those straight pieces that were the outer part of the picture, get them into place, the structure, and then you start putting pieces into the puzzle, and the more pieces you put in, the quicker you can put the later ones in, because you can now start to see how it all works. So when I started to realize in the early 1990s that a few people controlled the world, and to a large extent, to what end, I wanted to know, first of all, how they could do it. Because from how they could do it would explain the whole way the world works. And I also wanted to know where exactly they wanted to take the world. because I have this phrase, know the outcome and you'll see the journey. If you know the outcome, and this is so important to what we're going to talk about in terms of 9/11 and current events, if you know the outcome, you can see the stepping stones to the outcome. If you don't, then those same events, those same stepping stones, which are going in a particular direction, appear to be random events with no connection. So two things: how do the few control the many, and where are they going, so that we can see the progression in daily events of us going there. So to put the whole thing into the global setting, what I uncovered is that it started way back in places like Babylon and Sumer, and even further back in other parts of the world. And what emerged was I'll call it a cult. And it is a network of secret societies, semi-secret groups, and satanic type groups, very dark satanic groups. And they have an interlocking leadership if you go deep enough in the rabbit hole. And as they've moved through history, they've expanded their reach to the moment now, the time now, for some time, that it's been global. So you can follow this through out of Babylon, and you can follow it up into Rome. This same network created the Roman Empire and moved up into Northern Europe. And one of the things about this cult is wherever in history it laid down its hat, if you like, an empire followed. So you had the Babylonian Empire, then you had the Roman Empire, and then it moved up into Northern Europe, and it located its headquarters in London. And certainly other European capitals too, and still very much in Rome, and particularly the Vatican. But it centered itself then in Britain, in London. And what emerged out of that was the British Empire. The British Empire, on which it is said the sun never set, so vast was its reach. And then alongside that, you had other European empires that went into the Middle East, into Asia, into Africa, etc., into the Americas. And we had the colonial period. And that was a period of over control by European powers, where this cult was now located, over vast tracts of the globe. Then we had this point where the colonial powers appeared to roll back their control and give, quote, independence to these former colonies. But that's not what happened. It's not what happened in New Zealand, in Australia, in Africa, in the Americas. What happened was they swapped over control, which has a finite life, over control, which you can see whether people know who's controlling them, like it's the colonial system. That will eventually, it might take a long time, but it will eventually generate a resistance to it. But covert control can go on manipulating and controlling for indefinite periods, because who is going to resist and challenge a power they don't know exists because they can't see it? So what was left out in these colonial countries, former, it seemed, were certain families and secret society, semi-secret group, and satanic networks with an interlocking leadership that have gone on controlling these countries ever since. And what has developed and is a simple equation. When the few want to control the many, they have to centralize decision-making. They have to centralize power. the more you centralize decision-making and power, every step is giving fewer and fewer people more control over more and more people. So if you look at the progression through history, we started out in a tribal situation where the people in the tribes decided what happened in the tribe. Then we reached this point where lots of tribes came together and formed what we call nations. Now, a few people at the center of the nations are dictating to all the former tribes. Then you look into the European Union, and then all the nations come together, dictated by a few at the center. And so you can see the progression of fewer and fewer people controlling more and more. And eventually, this process was given a name: globalization. Globalization is simply this cult agenda for total centralized global control, progressing itself by centralizing power in every area of our lives. And what has been developed now is, it can be symbolized very accurately as a spider's web. Visualize a spider's web around the planet. And at the center is the spider, which is the hidden hand. That's in the shadows. And the strands in the web immediately around the spider are the most exclusive secret societies. Many of them, if not most of them, don't even have names, which makes them harder to identify and track. And as you come out from the spider, deep, deep in the shadows, way out of the public arena, you then start to hit the secret societies we do know of, but don't know overwhelmingly what goes on in them, especially their inner cores. We're talking the inner core, and I mean the inner core of the Freemasons, the inner core of the Jesuits, the Knights of Malta, the Knights Templar, Opus Dei, and many others. And still in the hidden, the agenda of the spider, dictated by the spider of this global control, comes out through the insider, really inner core secret societies, out through the ones we know. And eventually you reach a cusp. And this is where the hidden meets the seen. And at this cusp are organizations which are much more well known than they were when I started out. They were very secretive then because people weren't exposing them. I'm talking the Bilderberg Group, the Council on Foreign Relations in America, the Trilateral Commission, the Club of Rome, which was created specifically in the 1960s to use environmental concerns to justify centralization of power. This whole global warming caused by humans hoax came out of that organization and others. And so these cusp organizations, which include this explosion of think tanks around the world, their job is to take the spider agenda from the hidden and play it out into the scene in government policy, banking policy, the policy of all the basic institutions and corporations that we see in the world that we can see, the public arena. And so when you look at organizations that we can see, corporations, governments, banks, World Health Organization, CIA, Mossad, National Security Agency, the Pentagon, all of these different organizations, Silicon Valley, big time, they appear to be independent of each other and operating in a random world. But when you realize how this web works, they are connected at their inner core by this network, by this web. So if you very quickly, you look at the COVID situation now, the response and all the narrative and what we're told to believe and what we must do has effectively come out of the World Health Organization, which was created by this cult through the Rockefeller family in 1948, now run by Bill Gates, who was a massive associate of the Rockefeller family. And at the same time that they were issuing this narrative, the Silicon Valley giants like Facebook, etc., were saying, we are going to censor anyone who is challenging or questioning the World Health Organization version of the COVID story. And on the face of it, you see, you'd say, well, what the hell is that all about? What is Silicon Valley doing that for? But when you realize that Silicon Valley is owned by this cult and the World Health Organization is owned by this cult, the Silicon Valley is an arm of the cult defending the narrative of the cult coming out of the World Health Organization from anyone who wants to question it. So once you get that basic structure in mind, you lose this this way of seeing the world in which nothing is connected, and you see that everything is connected. And what I've done in the trigger regarding 9/11 is to connect through this web all these different players and organizations that had to be coordinated for 9/11 to be pulled off. And once you see how they connect, then you see how it's possible to pull 9/11 off and to pull the COVID hoax off, because the two are both expressions of the same cult pushing its agenda further and further on to the goal. And, you know, I mentioned a few minutes ago, know the outcome and you'll see the journey. What the outcome is planned to be is a what I call a Hunger Games society. Obviously, I've named it after the Hunger Games trilogy. I called it something else before, but the Hunger Games movies, which portrayed this massively wealthy, tiny elite dictating to a poverty-stricken population via basically a not just a police state, a police military state, is exactly the structure that this cult has been moving towards step by step all these years. And 9/11 was a step on that road, and COVID is a step on that road, a massive step on that road. There's steps in the same direction. So the idea is to create a society, and ladies and gentlemen, look around, in which a tiny few at the top of the pyramid are dictating everything. They control a population at the bottom of the pyramid through dependency of the population for survival on the few. And in between the two is a military police state, the fusion of the two eventually, preventing or seeking to prevent a challenge from the many of the few and imposing the will of the many on the few. And that structure, of course, was moved on by 9/11, because not only was it used very coldly, calculatedly pre-planned to justify the invasion and the creation of mayhem in the Middle East and all that came out from that, like mass movements of people into Europe, etc., from the Middle East and Asia. It also justified, not least through the Patriot Act in America, massive deletions of freedom, which have gone on being picked off until the COVID era, where there's been obviously a hysterical deletion of freedom. It's all part of the same pattern going in the same direction.
Thank you for laying out such a coherent context for such insanity. So could you zero in a bit on the who? What have you discovered in terms of who was actually orchestrating the events of 9/11?
Well, we got to go back in history again, because you have this global cult, and that ultimately was orchestrating the events of 9/11. But there was a particular part of this cult which started to emerge in the 1600s and has become massively influential. In fact, in many ways, centrally influential in the way this agenda is played out. And it goes back to a guy called Sabbatai Zevi, who claimed to be the Jewish Messiah. And he attracted a a vast following in the 1600s because of what he claimed to be the great Sabbatai Zevi messianic movement. Eventually, because he was operating in the Ottoman Empire, the Arab Ottoman Empire, he was told by the Sultan that he would basically either stop claiming what he was or prove that he was. Otherwise, there would be serious consequences. And the pressure was to convert to Islam. So what he did was convert to Islam, but only on the surface. And many of his followers, not all, a lot were disillusioned when he did it, but a lot also converted to Islam. And these became known as the Donma or Donme, which means to turn. They turned and they converted to Islam, but they didn't. And they became a cult. And you hear when you talk about this whole Jewish story that you must be anti-Semitic. Well, let's put this into context first of all. This cult, which became known as Sabbateans, is not actually Jewish. It hates Jews. The Sabbateans are in control of Israel now. Has anyone seen what they're doing to Jewish people in Israel now? It's unbelievable. It's Nazi Germany. And I'm in contact with a number of people in Israel. What's going on there for people that don't want to take this jab is staggering. They're now issuing the third jab, and now they're saying there's a fourth coming along. And the Jewish people need to understand, as much as anyone, that their rulers are not Jewish. They're Sabbatean. And what the Sabbatean cult did is invert everything. So if something was a fast day in Judaism, it would be a feast day in Sabbateanism. And all the taboos, the Jewish taboos, you shouldn't do this, it was encouraged that Sabbateans did them. It was an absolute inversion of the Jewish religion. And he eventually died, Sabbatai Zevi. And in the 1700s, although his cult continued, along came a man who's been described by Jewish historians as possibly the most evil man in Jewish history, called Jacob Frank. Jacob Frank claimed to be the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi and the reincarnation of the biblical patriarch Jacob. And he took Sabbateanism to new levels of depravity and extreme. And what this whole cult became expert at, which is very relevant, not just to current events, but to 9/11, is infiltration, where they would take over an institution, a country, a government, while posing as supporters and advocates and even members of that community, when they were actually had very, very different agenda for whatever they were taking over. They took over the Vatican, and Jacob Frank was very much involved in that. The cult took over the Vatican, still owns it today. And so Frank became very close to Mayer Amschel Rothschild and to a guy called Adam Weishaupt. And if you remember, it was Rothschild and Weishaupt with Jacob Frank that created what became known as the Bavarian Illuminati, which became the secret grouping that's now called the Illuminati. And the Sabbatean cult follows the Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical Bible, if you like, but particularly a group of books called the Zohar. And Zohar means splendor, radiance, illuminated, which is why and where the Illuminati comes from. And so this group started to infiltrate as the years passed. And it went into some very interesting areas, which will bring us round to 9/11. This Sabbatean cult was behind the Nazis. And it caused, because of the horrors of Nazi Germany and what they did to Jewish people. Remember, they hate Jewish people. Sabbateans hate Jewish people. There was this vast movement into Palestine, and Israel was created by this cult. But there were other streams of this cult. And one of them I show in detail in the books, the progression. It became the Saudi Arabia royal family, the House of Saud. And then we look at the story of 9/11 and hold on a minute, Saudi Arabia was massively involved. Most of the hijackers were connected to Saudi Arabia. Alleged hijackers were connected to Saudi Arabia. And so Sabbateanism controls Saudi Arabia with its, how does it treat its people, Saudi Arabia? Horrifically. Because the Sabbatean cult, like the inner core of the cult in general, they're psychopaths. They have no empathy, no compassion, no ability to put themselves in the feelings of those they affect and the horrors they impose on people. So basically, they do not have the fail-safe mechanism of human behavior, which is empathy. So people would look at the suggestion that the events of 9/11 were an inside job. What is happening in the COVID era is all manufactured and hoaxed, and with all the horrors that have been perpetrated on people as a result. And they would say, that's impossible. They would never do that. No, you would never do that. They do not have a smear of empathy. Therefore, they have no emotional consequence, no matter whatever they do. There are no limits. And they founded Israel, which was founded on the back of horrific terrorism against the Palestinians at the time. About 800,000 or so had to flee in fear of their lives and never to return. And they created, the cult created the structure in Israel. Again, I emphasize not Jewish, Sabbatean, which the Jewish population think is representing them. They don't realize actually they have anything but their interests at heart. They created Mossad. They created the Israeli Defense Forces. They've run the government ever since. No matter what party, they've run the government ever since. And then there's a chapter in the Trigger called Atlantic Crossing, where I show that after the creation of Israel in 1948, there was a massive movement of Sabbateans into America to start to seriously infiltrate America. And they went on to infiltrate the CIA, the National Security Agency, the Pentagon, all these different institutions. And they were fundamentally involved with others in the creation of 9/11 and the playing out of 9/11. And you mentioned the Project for the New American Century, which was a think tank. Here we go, think tank. This is one of the major vehicles they used to manipulate policy. The Project for the New American Century was established by two ultra-Zionists called William Crystal and Robert Kagan, and had among its number the key players who would be in the Bush administration a few years hence, like Donald Rumsfeld, who became the defense secretary at the time in 9/11, Paul Wolfowitz, who was his deputy, but the real power in the Pentagon. People like Richard Pearl, people like Dov Zakheim, who was comptroller of the Pentagon. And they produced a document in September 2000, a year before 9/11, and just months before the people that wrote it overwhelmingly came to power with Bush in January 2001. And this called for American forces to fight and decisively win multiple theater wars, to regime change in countries like Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran, and others. And as a result of 9/11, a year later, the momentum, the excuse, problem, reaction, solution, create the problem, get the reaction, horror, fear, do something, offer the solution to the problems you have covertly created. And immediately that process of seeking to pick off those countries began, which would have had no momentum and no justification without 9/11. And when you see the number of ultra-Zionists in the key positions relating to 9/11 before, during, and the cover-up afterwards, when you consider that the global Jewish population is 0.2%, 0.2%, the Jewish population of America is 2%. And I'm talking not about the Jewish population, I'm talking about this Sabbatean cult that hates Jews. Look at how few that must be. And yet the number that were in the key positions across 9/11 are absolutely fantastic, as I lay out in the book.
Let me jump in for just a second on that, because I really want to shine a light on this. This is so important for humanity right now. The three of the biggest lies that have created so much damage are the lone gunman in Dallas, 19 hijackers in New York on 9/11, and that David Icke is anti-Semitic. So I just want to flatten that one once and for all as best we can, because, you know, I showed you this stack of books that I've read of David's, and I've watched all of his videos. I've known the guy for over 10 years, and not once, I'll stand to this to anybody, not once have I ever heard a single xenophobic or racist sentence out of his mouth. So if you're hearing that he's anti-Semitic or anti-whatever, as an ethnicity or a race or a religion, what he's anti is anti-cruelty. He's anti-global domination. And if somebody's involved in that agenda, he's willing to call them out. And whether it's the Christian Morgans and Rockefellers, or the Jewish Rothschilds, or the Buddhists or the Muslims or whatever, this guy doesn't care. What he cares about is the virtue, is the sovereignty of every single human being. So when somebody says to you, "Oh, how come you're reading David Icke? He's an anti-Semite. He hates Jews." In social media for the last 10 years, I've been saying to everyone who's ever done this to me, I mean, it's bad enough just what they do to me in relation to this. I say, okay, send me one single video clip or paragraph that's not taken out of context that justifies your belief that he is anti-Semitic. 10 years, not a single person has ever sent anything.
Well, this is the game, you see, Foster. This Sabbatean cult, this is the inversion. This is the reversal. This Sabbatean cult hates Jews. And yet it hides behind them to protect itself from exposure. Because if you start challenging this Sabbatean cult, which is a major part, like I say, of this global cult in general, then they throw the anti-Semitic card at you. And let's just get something right as well. The massive misuse of the term anti-Semitism. Semitism refers to a group of languages in the Middle East, which is overwhelmingly, like almost in totality, Arabic languages. And so that even the term anti-Semitic is a misnomer. But see, you're right. What I'm interested in is the truth. And I'm not going to be intimidated by fearing what people will say about me, not to go in areas that the information justifies that I should go into if I want to know the truth. So let me just go through this. It's just a few things from the trigger and see if people think it was worth asking the question, what's going on here? So we have this, this figure of 2% Jewish people in America, 0.2% worldwide of the population. And I'm talking about a fraction of that that's not actually Jewish, but just poses as such, the Sabbateans. First of all, you had the Project for the New American Century that had laid out this plan that included this. You mentioned it in your introduction, that this plan for regime change in all these countries was only going to happen, this document said in September 2000, without something like a new Pearl Harbor to justify the regime change sequence, but also justifying the military spending necessary for it. So when 9/11 happened, that was all in place, waiting for a new Pearl Harbor. And just by coincidence, I mean, it was just an accident, like a new Pearl Harbor came along just the right time in the sequence. And what did Boy George Bush, the fake president, Cheney was the president, obviously, what did he call it when 9/11 happened? He said, this is the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century. And by the way, that 2001, of course, was an anniversary. These people love these little symbolic cues and clues. Was an anniversary of Pearl Harbor. So, first of all, the Twin Towers actually were built because of the Rockefeller family, Nelson Rockefeller and David Rockefeller. David Rockefeller and Nelson Rockefeller were absolute cult to their DNA. So the World Trade Center lease was owned by an ultra-Zionist called Larry Silverstein, after a deal agreed with another ultra-Zionist called Louis Eisenberg. He was the head of the New York Port Authority at the time. And Eisenberg agreed to sell the lease into private hands, Silverstein, for the first time, just before 9/11 happened. Both of these characters were friends. They were both friends of Benjamin Netanyahu, the longtime prime minister of Israel, the guy who said on 9/11, when questioned in the wake of the attacks, that the attacks of 9/11 were good for Israel. At the same time that Larry Silverstein purchased the lease, he took out a massively increased insurance in the wake of a terrorist attack. So as a result of that, Silverstein, and his partner, a guy called Frank Lowy, made billions out of the loss of the Twin Towers. The original insurers for Silverstein of the towers were Ace, Marsh & McClelland, and AIG, all run by an ultra-Zionist called Morris Greenberg and his family. The Greenbergs then quickly sold on their responsibility before the attacks to 24 other companies through a process they call reinsuring. And so these 24 companies took the hit, not the Greenbergs. Greenberg's a former deputy chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations, which I mentioned in one of those CUSP organizations. And he has connections into the CIA, Mossad, the Anti-Defamation League, which is a Mossad front, in other words, a Sabbatean cult front. And he's a longtime associate of Henry Kissinger, who is Sabbatean cult, again, to his fingernails. 8 years before 9/11, the same Greenberg went into partnership with an ultra-Zionist family called Kroll, who were behind Kroll and Associates, and they would be responsible for security at the World Trade Center at the time of the 9/11 attacks. Ultra-Zionist owned companies Sabbatean in other words, connected to Israeli intelligence, ran security then at the World Trade Center and 9/11 airports through a company that connects into the domestic intelligence agency of Israel called Shin Bet. And they ran, and I'll come into this, this is so crucial to understanding how 9/11 was pulled off. They ran the computer systems of the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, and other government departments and agencies. That's so important in understanding how they pulled it off on the day. Silverstein's partner, Frank Lowy, he joined the ultra-Zionist terror group Haganah in 1945, one of these terror groups that bombed and terrorized Israel into existence in 1948. During the reign of murder and terror and intimidation of Palestinians. And Lowy is a close associate, again, of Israeli prime ministers Benjamin Netanyahu, Ehud Olmert, and Silverstein, his partner, is a close associate of Netanyahu. They used to speak on the phone, Netanyahu and Silverstein, every Sunday. Also, he was a friend of Ariel Sharon, who was prime minister of Israel at the time of 9/11, and another one called Ehud Barak, who also comes into the story in the books. So Silverstein, every morning, would go to the window on the World restaurant on the 106th and 7th floor of the North Tower to have breakfast, but not on the morning of 9/11, because he said his wife insisted that he go for a dermatology appointment. Another great coincidence is that two of his children, Roger and Lisa, who were vice presidents of Silverstein Properties, and also held breakfast meetings very regularly with clients at the windows on the World restaurant. They were running late and so didn't get there as they normally would. And the one who successfully lobbied for the World Trade Center to be privatized and thus sold to Silverstein was an ultra-Zionist billionaire called Ronald Lauder of Estee Lauder Cosmetics, and he was instrumental in Netanyahu becoming prime minister in Israel. Lauder was chairman of the New York State Advisory Commission on Privatization and New York State Research Council on Privatization when he was pressing for the World Trade Center to be sold into private hands for the first time, which it was to Silverstein via the ultra-Zionist Eisenberg. So the guy who oversaw, and he was appointed earlier in 2001, the guy who oversaw the investigation of what happened on 9/11, the absolute non-investigation, was a guy called Michael Chertoff, ultra-Zionist, son of a Mossad agent. And he was named United States Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division in 2001, which led the investigation, which wasn't. And he presided over not only the non-investigation into the attacks, but the destruction of evidence from ground zero, which needed to be examined in detail to see what happened. You mentioned that in your introduction. And it was Zionist-owned companies that removed that debris from ground zero and then sold it off to places like Asia for smelting. If I can contemplate a greater insult to the people who died on 9/11, well, I don't think I can. Then there was the ultra-Zionist Philip Zelikow. He was the executive director of the 9/11 Commission that ran the non-investigation. The 9/11 Commission report is one of the greatest works of fiction in human history, provable fact. And it was overseen by this guy, Zelikow, who ran the whole show with a rod of iron. I explain all this in the book in detail. Then there was Judge Alvin K. Hellerstein, another ultra-Zionist and an associate of Chertoff. He oversaw the cases in which 9/11 families refused to accept compensation, and which came with a no legal action clause, because they wanted their day in court, because they wanted the evidence looked at. Well, Hellerstein ran what was called a war of attrition to break them down. And over a period, he got 96 families withdrawing their legal action because it was taking so long. And one by one, they conceded until the last one conceded in 2011. And therefore, there was not a court case in which the evidence could be put forward. Another ultra-Zionist called Sheila Birnbaum was a special mediator between the families and other parties in the lawsuits, overseen by Hellerstein. Then Larry Silverstein was later given another big payday on top of his billions, with a payout of nearly 9.52 million when he successfully sued American Airlines Group and United Continental Holdings and other aviation-linked defendants for losses he claimed to have suffered over the 9/11 attacks. The litigation battle went on for 13 years and was overseen by Judge Alvin Hellerstein, who also presided, as I say, over the litigation stemming from the attacks and prevented families from 9/11 victims getting their day in court. Then there's ultra-Zionist Kenneth R. Feinberg. He was the lawyer that administered the No Evidence, No Trial Victim Compensation Fund and was trying to get people to take it so they wouldn't go to court. And he summed up it all when he said Hellerstein knew from the beginning that the cases had to settle, and he got there. Feinberg rather, was also special master for executive compensation, deciding who got the bailout money after the financial crash in 2008. And
let's also mention, David, this guy, Larry Silverstein, that you keep coming back to, he is on video after the collapse of Building 7. When he was asked about it, he said, well, we had to pull it.
Yeah.
I'm sure he regrets that to this day.
Yeah, he said they had to pull it, which of course is parlance for controlled demolition, which is in some form it was.
So I think we're getting a sense that the evidence of the causality is there for anyone who wants to know. David has laid it out. So have a lot of other fantastic researchers, David Ray Griffin and Rebecca Roth and Dylan Avery and Jason Burns. I mean, the list goes on and on. Let me just, I want to make sure we have enough time to really connect this with what's going on today. So can you summarize a little bit to bring it right up to the current manipulation of 9/11? Can you talk about the interrelationship of the U.S. deep state, Mossad, and Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, just to finish this point, Osama bin Laden videos in which it's claimed that he said he was part of it and he wasn't, clearly wasn't. They came into the public arena via ultra-Zionist organizations. One was called SITE, run by a lady called Rita Katz, who is the daughter of an alleged Israeli spy, and by another organization called Intel Center, run by an ultra-Zionist called Ben Vensky. And just to finish this line, because a lot of people will not know this, that in 2001, there was a US Drug Enforcement Administration, a DEA report, revealing that 200 Israelis, among them former military intelligence operatives, that they were arrested in the United States during 2001. And I show where they went and what they did in the trigger, and it was clearly connected to 9/11. They were posing as art students. 140 Israelis were arrested in 2001 before the attacks, and then another 60 afterwards. And then we have the dancing Israelis, where which gives absolute solid gold confirmation that the attacks were known about. Because these dancing Israelis came out of this. A New Jersey housewife looked from her apartment window, crossed the river from the towers the day they happened, when they were burning. And she saw young men kneeling on the roof of a white Chevrolet van. And they were filming what was happening, and they were whooping and dancing and high-fiving, which is what took her attention, obviously. She thought they were Arabic. They turned out to be Israelis, and at least some of them were known to be connected to Mossad. And these Israelis said that they were simply recording the attacks. But some of them were seen at the scene where they were recording the day before. And even at that time, they were talking about terrorist attacks. But even Michael Chertoff, in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, was saying, well, it was probably a pilot error or something, which is absolute nonsense. But what caused 9/11, what was behind it, was not known when they were filming. And so they were arrested, because there's a lot of other reasons to arrest them. They were operating out of a company, a moving company called Urban Moving Systems. And the head of the Urban Moving Systems in New Jersey was interviewed by the FBI. They said, we're going to talk to you again. And he fled to Israel, never to be seen again. And what happened, you might ask, so what happened to these 200 Israelis posing as art students that they said were spying? What happened to the dancing Israelis? Well, they were released after some time on the say-so of Michael Chertoff, the aforementioned overseer of the non-investigation, in league with a guy called Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz was a lawyer who defended the pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. And Jeffrey Epstein's co-partner in that horrific ring was Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of Robert Maxwell, a British businessman who was a known Mossad agent and named as such by a former Mossad agent. So you can see wherever we look, you see this continuing theme. And that's why, Foster, I couldn't just walk away from this and say, well, I know what they're going to call me if I go down this road. I'm after the truth.
Yeah.
And so this cult, with the Sabbatean cult, like I say, a very influential part of it, is pushing the world towards this Hunger Games society, where there will be no freedom, 24/7 surveillance, and total control of the population via dependency. This is why we're having lockdowns and lockdowns and lockdowns over and over again in the COVID era, because the lockdowns are nothing to do with health. They're there for a simple reason: to destroy the independent income of the population, independent businesses, independent employment, so the population becomes dependent on the state for survival. And this is why they're talking about having a guaranteed income, a pittance, because of all the jobs disappearing and what have you. Because they're creating the Hunger Games society, they're creating the dependency, because while you have an independent income, you're not dependent on the few to survive. You have a measure of freedom. Once you lose that ability to provide for yourself and for your family, now the state has got you. Because what they say to you, and it's coming, is, yeah, we'll give you this guaranteed income pittance, but only if you do what you're told.
Right.
Otherwise, you don't get it. And look what's happening with the vaccine passports, etc. You can only live a normal life, or any kind of a normal life, as long as you do what we say and have these fake jabs. And we've seen in Australia the precursor to this over the last few years, where if you're on state benefits, then you have to have your children vaccinated according to the schedule of the government. Otherwise, you lose benefits. So that's what the lockdowns are about. So what we're looking at is a progression through 9/11. Tony Blair, who is cult. I mean, there's not a cell in Tony Blair's body that isn't cult controlled. The man's a total psychopath and ignoramus, as well as being a deeply dark and sinister man. And he said, as Prime Minister of Britain on 9/11, the world changed on 9/11. Yeah, because it was meant to.
Right.
The post 9/11 world had started the change and the progression that was leading towards this massive card being played now, called the COVID hoax, to justify all the things that I've been saying for 30 years. This is the cult agenda. This is where they want to take the world. You look at the COVID era, and it's being justified to impose all of them. I mean, you've got people in Australia coming out of their winter now as we start to move in towards ours, where they want to do the same if they can get away with it, where they can't leave their homes. And there's troops on the streets imposing COVID regulations. I mean, what greater definition of fascism do you need? And 9/11 was a massive, it was almost, I call the book The Trigger, because it was, although this has been moving and progressing since way, way, way back, 9/11 was the trigger for the new impetus, which has led us to where we are now.
Yeah.
The
Well,
same,
before we leave,
groups are behind it that were behind 9/11. They're the same groups behind COVID.
yeah, before we dive deeper into that, before we leave 9/11, a lot of people are confused about the role of Saudi Arabia. Can you describe how that fits in, what you described in your book on that?
Well, Saudi Arabia, being Sabbatean cult, would play their part in the Sabbatean cult plan. So, you know, you've got some lawsuits, I know, in America where some of the families are trying to sue the Saudi government, but they're suing the wrong people. I'm not saying the Saudi government weren't involved. They were. This is why the hijackers, for which there is no evidence whatsoever they were on the planes, none. Look at the book, the details, none. We got Annie Hanjour, who was supposed to have flown Flight 77 into the Pentagon with an incredible turn and low approach that many professional pilots said they couldn't have done. And he was banned from hiring a one-engine plane at a puddle jumping flying school 6 weeks before, because he was so incompetent and therefore so dangerous to be allowed to fly a one-engine plane. It's insane. The whole thing's insane. Nothing makes sense. So Saudi Arabia obviously was connected to these fake hijackers, which were the patsies of and where, you know, they've probably been taken out now, but they were the patsies of who to blame and who to say this is who did it, so you can hide who really did it. If the families want to sue the people that were really behind it, they should be suing the United States deep state, and they should be suing Mossad, the characters that were running Israel at the time, and other agencies that operate out of Israel.
So let me summarize for a moment my perspective on the why of 9/11, just to highlight a few of the reasons why they would have done this. One, it allows them to create and sustain ongoing war, and the military-industrial complex, you know, gets billions for these ongoing wars. They get to create a lot of fear. They get to try their new weapons. They get to go steal oil from other countries. They get to protect Israel, which is really the Rothschild creation as a center for the global financial takeover. They get to steal the gold from these Middle Eastern countries. They get to install a Rothschild central banking system. They get to create the Patriot Act. They get to clear the Black Eagle Trust bonds. They get to destroy these foreign cultures. They get to take over their economies and their currencies. And like David said, these are all just carefully planned steps in their agenda for global domination. So as we said in Thrive 2, if any of you haven't seen Thrive 2 yet, please go to thriveon.com, check out Thrive 2. And one of the things we say in there is that the real struggle right now is not between nation states or classes or genders or ethnicities. It's between those of us who want to be free and those who would continue to steal our freedom from us. And that's the deep state. And that's what David has been laying out for 31 years and being accused of all this other stuff in order to distract from the fact that he's exposing this agenda in time for us to actually obsolete it and create a thriving world. So David, let's go on.
I agree with all that, Foster. But
Yeah.
just there's one other thing as well, because the way this cult works, it's basically the way it lays things out, the way it plans things, is like, you see all these lines of dominoes in a room and they knock the first one down and then all the others go down. Well, they basically plan like that. And another aspect of 9/11, which is not mentioned, or rarely if at all, is the fact that this cult agenda, again, I've been writing about this for a long time, is to destroy what we call Western culture and the Western way of life. It's really got that big time in its gun sights. This is why Biden is opening the southern border. This is why vast numbers of people from other cultures and other areas of the world are moving into Europe. But look at the sequence. You had 9/11, that justified, it's claimed, the invasion of Iraq based on a lie, weapons of mass destruction that weren't, because they knew they weren't, but on the agenda was invading Iraq. So we need an excuse. Well, we'll say it's got weapons of mass destruction. Yeah. And in Libya and in Syria. And what did that cause? They knew it would. It caused, understandably, if I was them, I'd do the same. It caused this movement of people out of those countries. And they're not going to go south into Africa, are they? They're going to go north into Europe. So this great movement of people, which I was saying was the plan way, way back, started, as the plan is happening in America as well. And the idea is to, and the thing with Afghanistan recently, it's been portrayed as a disaster and incompetence. But incompetence is so often used to disguise cold calculation. So now there's a big movement of people out of Afghanistan. And if I was faced with being ruled by the Taliban, I'd be joining them. But the point is, there's another movement of people out into the Northern Europe and across to America. This is all planned. And so you find that the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, that is not all part of this cult think tank web, is being funded by George Soros. George Soros has been funding the movement of people into Europe from the Middle East and Asia and Africa. He's been funding the movement of people out of Mexico and further south into South America across the southern border because he's part of this cult. And, this cult makes sure that its front people get very, very rich. People like Soros and people like Gates and what have you. But it comes with a rider. And that is, we'll make you very, very rich. But a great chunk of that wealth has to be used to advance our agenda. So you look at all the things that Soros funds, including his Open Society foundations, Open Society, Open Borders, the end of countries. And you look at what Gates is funding, well, everything that moves on the cult agenda. And you see that these things like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they are simply there to fund the cult agenda under the disguise of philanthropy.
Yeah. Amazing description. And I just want to tune in again for those of you who are listening, for whom a lot of this might be new. I just want to share my condolences at the demise of an old and probably much more comfortable worldview. The thing with the kind of work that David does and the kind of work that we do at Thrive is that it's not like, whether it's 9/11 or COVID, it's not like we're bringing people better news. If you think that the COVID thing is real, the vaccines are real, the tests are real, the death certificates are real, and the government has got this handled, that's that can be kind of a cheery outlook. Okay, we got a problem, but the whole world's coming together. We're going to solve this thing. So along comes David Icke and Foster Gamble saying, no, wait a minute. No, it's even worse than that. It's the entire world is being subjected to these lies and abuse in order to control or eliminate all of us. So why in the world would anyone want to open their heart and mind to this type of perspective? Well, because number one, it's true. And number two, because when you know the truth about these type of things, you can start having the conversations and taking the actions which can actually solve the thing rather than go on as ignorant victims.
Yeah, this is the thing. You know, I hear people in what's called sometimes the spiritual movement saying you mustn't say things, you'll frighten people. Well, hold on a minute. Fear is in the control of the receiver. You can look at this information and you can say, well, that's fantastic, because now I'm much more streetwise to what's going on, and I can avoid being pulled in by it and being manipulated by it. So many people now, as you know, are awakening to a much vaster spectrum of the world as a result of coming into contact with this information and then seeing it play out before their eyes in the world. So you can go into fear and you can say, don't want to hear it, turn him off. Or you can say, hey, this is giving me power to take back control of my life. Because this is how it works, Foster. The whole thing comes down to psychology. It comes down to perception. And the way this cult works, until it's kind of entered the room in the COVID era, it had no option but to do so because it's playing its end game now. Yeah. But before that, and still to a large extent, it's operating in the shadows. Now, what are the shadows? Not just symbolically, literally, they're the human subconscious. They're operating out of the realm of the conscious mind. So therefore, the conscious mind is not aware it's being manipulated. And what they're trying to get access to is your subconscious mind. They do it with subliminal advertising, subliminal messages that are coming out of televisions all the time, so that they can put perceptions, feelings, responses, opinions into the subconscious mind. And then they float through and enter the conscious mind, at which point people think, this is my thought, this is my opinion, when actually it's been put in there at a subconscious level. And so what this information is doing, this knowledge of the conspiracy and how it works and where it wants to go, it's taking the conspiracy out of the shadows, it's taking it out of the subconscious, and it's showing it to the conscious mind. And if you look at subliminal advertising and subliminal images and inserts, you show them to people, you show them to their conscious mind, and they will not be able to see it. 99% of the time, they won't see it. And then you point out where it is. Oh yes, that's where it is. From that moment, whenever they see that picture again, even years later, the subliminal is the first thing they see in it, which they couldn't see before, because the conscious mind has become aware of it. And so what this alternative media movement has been doing is taking this manipulation, which is operating in the subconscious, in the shadows, and it's putting it in front of the conscious mind. And that's why now there's this vast increase. I mean, you know, when I started out 30 years ago, you couldn't fill a phone booth. I mean, it just no interest at all. But now it's fantastic because people have been able to have this, their conscious mind presented with this, at which point it's like the subliminal image. They can see it. And they start to say, this is what's happening. That's what they'll do next. That's what they're, and it's all coming out of them, when before it was what's going on, you know, what's happening. And this is why it's so important, and why this information shouldn't be received in some, oh, that's negative, you know, shut up, don't want to talk about it. We should be encompassing it, because it's giving us the power of knowledge to make a difference, to stop this reaching its ultimate goal. And its ultimate goal is way beyond even where we are now.
Well, I want to show one slide before we jump into questions. We've got 100 questions waiting for you. But before we do that, I want to show one slide that just kind of summarizes this whole perspective on the agenda that we've done on 9/11. It takes the same thing and does it for what I call the covert 19. Okay, so what is happening out of the propaganda about the so-called virus, the so-called tests, the so-called vaccines, and so forth? Well, they're getting anti-social distancing. They're getting people to wear masks. They're getting permission to lock down people in their houses, closing businesses. They've banned demonstrations, particularly in places like France and Hong Kong. They're authorizing testing, tracking, and tracing. They're getting bank bailouts. They're causing the economic collapse that they've been longing for in the US and around the world. Billionaires have been making billions. They're moving toward a cashless society. They have permission to censor the internet. They're creating civil unrest leading to martial law. They're forcing vaccines, doing RFID chipping through the vaccine, forwarding their depopulation agenda, preparing for their Green New Deal and Agenda 21, moving the social credit score beyond China to the rest of the world, bringing in socialism as preparation for communism, and then global technocratic fascism, including universal health care, and ultimately to have a one world government owned and directed by this same deep state cult that David has been describing. So that's a lot of payoff for creating this illusion of the COVID scare that unfortunately so many people have still bought into. And I invite any of you who still believe all of that, don't believe us, but start checking out the alternative information with people like David Icke and Bobby Kennedy and Del Bigtree, and the list goes on and on, you know, Joe Mercola, Sayer G, Kelly Brogan, and so forth. So let me come back out of sharing. I want to move into the Q&A, but I want to actually start by claiming the right to ask you a couple of questions myself here, David. And where I want to start on that is you deal with more challenging information than probably anyone that I know, and you've done it for 3 decades. You're actually looking healthier and stronger now than when I first met you 10 years ago. So there's something that you're doing that a lot of people are looking for, which is, how do I maintain my center? How do I maintain my well-being and my soul connection while dealing with these horrible truths about what psychopaths are doing on planet Earth?
Well, I would say it's self-identity.
Yeah.
What this cult is trying to do is to isolate people's perception in the 5 senses, because the 5 senses only see dots. They don't see connections. If you look at how the 5 senses decode reality, they decode form with empty space in between. It's all dots. And yet there is no empty space. Everything's connected by a field of energy consciousness, like a sea of energy consciousness, but it's operating on levels of frequency that the 5 senses don't pick up, are not equipped to decode. So we see only the dots. And if you get pulled into the 5 senses, which is exactly what they want, you self-identify with the labels of a human life. And that's all they are. They are labels of a human experience. They are not the I, they are the experiences the I is briefly having in a brief sojourn in this tiny band of frequencies we call the human world. Called a human experience. What the cult wants to do, and works so hard to do, is to get us to self-identify with the labels. So that's the I. So if you meet someone and you say, hello, who are you? They'll reel off their human labels. They'll tell you their name. They'll tell you their location, maybe where they were born. They'll tell you their job and all this stuff, but they're telling you the experiences they're having. They're not telling you who you are, which is consciousness having a brief human experience. And of course, if you, as in your five sense perception, and we all have a five sense perception, of course we do, because that's the level that interacts with this reality and allows us to be what we call human and to pick things up, because we are interacting in this frequency band that relates to the five senses. But if you only do that, you can get disconnected from the true I, the greater self, the eternal self, the infinite self, which should be connecting with us and giving us another fix, another angle on how to look at the world and how to look at the self. What the cult knows this. You see, what the cult has been doing, why they have secret societies, is to keep secrets. What keep secrets from who? From the population. And yes, they want to keep secret what the plan is for the world, because they don't want people to know what's coming, because then they'll see it. But crucial to this secrecy is hoarding the knowledge of reality itself and the nature of reality and infinite reality. They need to keep that from the population, because they want the population to self-identify only with their five sense labels, the I am R's, I call them. And if you notice, Foster, what they're doing is trying to, and have very successfully with many people, subdivide the previous labels into smaller and smaller labels. This is what identity politics is all about. It's all manipulated. So now we have a situation where you're not just identifying with the label of human, which is a brief experience. You are using different letters to self-identify with the fine detail of your sexual preference. I mean, whatever your sexual preference is, as long as everyone's agreed that it's okay and that they're all participating in agreement, do what you like. But why did you have to self-identify your I with your sexual preference? That's just an experience, and it's a brief one. But that's what the cult wants, because the more you become myopic in your sense of the I, your sense of self, your self-identity, the more you are disconnecting from the true self, which is consciousness. Now, to answer the question, once you take your self-identity from I am human and I am my labels to I am the consciousness, infinite, eternal, having those experiences, and that's great. I mean, it's great to be having experiences as an English bloke or whatever. I love the landscape and all that. That's great. It's no problem. Having experiences as a Muslim, as a Jewish person, all good. But no, it's an experience, and it's not the eternal I. And when you expand into that self-identity, everything changes. First of all, our perceptions become our experienced reality. They become our what we experience, because we are interacting like fish swimming in a sea in this this field of possibility and probability, waiting to be connected with and made manifest. And when you are in your five sense identity, I am R, what I call your phantom self, you are perceiving yourself in such narrow terms that transmits itself as the narrowness of frequency that you are operating on, the narrowness of frequency with which you are interacting with the field of possibility and probability. Once you go through this process of establishing your self-identity as I am the consciousness, ultimately infinite consciousness having this experience, that self-identity expansion expands you into interaction with greater and greater swathes of the field of possibility and probability. And suddenly, and you know this from your own experience and the experience of people you know, what starts to happen is suddenly people find amazing synchronicity in their lives that wasn't there before. Their life becomes this daily experience of, oh, fancy seeing you here. Oh my, what's the chances of that? Why? Because as you expand your self-identity, you're expanding into more and more levels of possibility and probability, which you can manifest as an experience, and amazing things start to happen, which weren't happening before because you were there. And that's why the cult wants us there, because it knows how this works. That's part of what is passed over at the inner core of this secret society network, knowledge of reality and how it works. And so everything changes once you go to this level of self-identity, because first of all, the human life takes on a completely different perspective. Now it's a brief experience. It's not all encompassing. It's a brief experience. You know that life is eternal. Therefore, no matter what happens here, life is eternal. There is no death. The body has a cycle. We have eternity, because we are not the body. We are experiencing through the body. And so you lose fear. And you also conclude that at some point, we're all going to leave the body. I mean, that I bloody hope so. Do I want to stay here forever? Jim. So if I have to concede my self-respect, if I have to cower and keep my mouth shut because what will people think of me, just to continue a little longer in embodiment, well, I don't think that is a good trade for self-respect and being in my own unique truth. I'll prefer to leave earlier if necessary. I won't, but I would prefer to do that, doing what I know to be right and holding my self-respect, than to eke out a bit longer, giving those away. It's like Martin Luther King said. It was a long quote, but basically he was saying, if you're 38, which he was at the time, and you have the chance to stand up for some great cause, but you don't, because you fear, you're intimidated, you fear what will happen to you, you fear being shot, you fear this, fear that, then you may go on, he said, to live until you're 90. But the cessation of the activity of your body at 90 will simply be the conclusion of your spiritual death when you were 38.
Beautiful.
Because once you concede your self-respect, only submission remains. And this is why this cult wants us to give our self-respect away. This is why it puts complete morons in positions of power. I'm not kidding. Daniel Andrews, Victoria, Australia, Biden, Johnson, all these people, complete morons in positions of power in health. Because if they can put a moron on display in a position of power, and they say you must do this, like Fauci. If you had a brain cell, it would die of loneliness, Fauci. But if you can see that and you still do what they say, despite it, then you have handed over your self-respect. This is why they want us to see all the contradictions and all the craziness about the COVID restrictions. They want us to see them. It's not that they're trying to hide it. They want us to see them, because if we can see the nonsense, the unscientific basis, the contradiction, the lies, but we still do what they say and still adhere to them, we've handed the self-respect away, and then it's gone. What has brought down every tyranny in history? Self-respect. They're the people that say, not having it. Well, we'll do this if you don't. Well, do it, because I'm still not doing it, because my self-respect is not for sale. And that's what starts the momentum for all tyrannies to eventually be brought down. Other people will come in once the pioneers have started it, but it's the self-respect that starts it. And we need this self-respect now. And so the other thing about expanding your awareness is when you open your heart, which is the key to expanding your awareness, opening this heart vortex. The heart connects us with out there, with wisdom, with love in its true sense. not the attraction only kind of love, love in its true sense, in its infinite sense. And love knows that there is no death. Love knows that we're on an eternal journey of experiencing forever. And love will always do something else. It will always do what it knows to be right. And it won't go through a list of, this will, emotion, head, right. I know this is what I should do in this situation, but what are the consequences for me? Oh, no, the list got too long. I'd like to do what I know to be right, but not that badly. Thank you. What love says is, I'm not even looking at consequences. Looking at consequences means I am contemplating not doing what I know to be right. What? This is what I know to be right. So what do? I do it. And it's no matter what the intimidation. And, you know, those of us who will overwhelmingly be watching this, who are in the are awakening and can see, we are the only people that can bring this down. The people doing it's not going to bring it down. The people who have given their minds away and are in the Alcatraz of the five senses, they're not going to bring it down. Because they don't think there's anything to bring down. It's us that will, not only can, will bring this down.
And for those of you who may, for those of you, let me just jump in here for a minute, David. For those of you who may be finding it unusual, if you haven't been with David Icke before, and you're suddenly going, wait a minute, what's this conspiracy guy sounding like, you know, Thich Nhat Hanh or Adyashanti or somebody like this is who David is. And then he does this other work from that space. And he's written a lot about it. And one of the books is Infinite Love is the only truth. Everything else is illusion. So I highly recommend that amongst his other books. I want to switch gears a little bit here and go into some of the public questions. As we do that, Leandro, do you have any announcements that you want to share in case people need to get off at the top of the hour? Anything you want to share with them? Because I know David has said he would stay on for an extra half hour for these questions.
Yeah, this is fantastic. We got a lot of great questions. The only announcement that I would make is just to remind people that if you're not a Freedom Portal subscriber currently, then to definitely take advantage of the 7-day free trial we're offering right now. It's a great time because Freedom Portal subscribers are actually now getting exclusive beta access to Thrive's activist platform, the Thrive Solutions Hub. So if you want to join with like a like-minded community and collaborate towards solutions, and this is a good time to join us as a Freedom Portal subscriber.
Okay, thanks. And also, let me just announce so that everybody sees it if you have to go, that our next show, next Saturday, I'm going to do a 7 levels deep on the role of false flags in the agenda for global domination. This has been a fantastic kickoff with 9/11 and with COVID, but we're going to go deeper into the Reichstag fire in the Gulf of Tonkin. And you know, the list goes on and on. You begin to realize that history is in fact usually shaped, the big events, by false flags. So it's critical that you understand that. So I'll do that next week. And then our next session after that, we're going to have 3 amazing guests from South Africa on who are creating a whole TV series called the Thriver series. And we'll have Nikki and Torsten and Ryan on describing. They're almost finished. They've filmed all their episodes and they're just in the home stretch on getting this out to the world. So they'll be our next in the Worldview Pioneer series. Okay, so let's go back and open up to some public questions. Leandro, do you have some ready to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have like 20 variations of this particular question, and that is what happened to the people and the planes during 9/11?
Well, you know, it's very clear when you look at the evidence, which I go into in the trigger in great detail, that the planes that took off from the airports were not the planes that ended up where they did. So they were landed somewhere. And if you look at, you just find this in the trigger, actually. There's a guy called James Bamford who wrote a book which came out in the summer of 2001, actually. It was called Body of Secrets. And he is a former investigative producer with, I think it's ABC. And he uncovered something called Operation Northwoods, which was a plan in the 1960s, at the time of the Kennedy presidency, by the Pentagon. These lunatics, this would have been the cult again, which owns the Pentagon. And he uncovered this Operation Northwoods in the archive, in the official archive, which was a plan which Kennedy put a stop to, it seems, to basically do what happened on 9/11. So this is what James Bamford wrote. The plan, which had the written approval of the chairman and every member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, called for innocent people to be shot on American streets, for boats carrying refugees fleeing Cuba to be sunk on the high seas, and a wave of violent terrorism to be launched in Washington, D.C., Miami, and elsewhere. People would be framed for bombings they did not commit. Planes would be hijacked using phony evidence. All of it would be blamed on Castro, thus giving Lemnitzer, the guy, head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and his cabal the excuse, as well as the public and international backing they needed to launch their war. Now, that is exactly what happened on 9/11, and it was planned in the 1960s by the Pentagon. But this is the point in terms of the planes and what happened to them.
And let me just also throw in case you're not going to, that it was John F. Kennedy who said no to Operation Northwoods, one of many reasons why he was taken out.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is a quote from the document. An aircraft at Elgin Air Force Base would be painted and numbered. I'm describing 9/11 here. As an exact duplicate for a civil registered aircraft belonging to a CIA proprietary organization in the Miami area. At a designated time, the duplicate would be substituted for the actual civil aircraft and would be loaded with selected passengers, all boarded under carefully prepared aliases. Note how light the passenger numbers were on all of those planes on 9/11. The actual registered aircraft would be converted into a remote controlled drone. Takeoff times of the drone aircraft and the actual aircraft will be scheduled to allow a rendezvous south of Florida. From the rendezvous point, the passenger carrying aircraft will descend to minimum altitude and go directly to an auxiliary field at Elgin Air Force Base, where arrangements will have been made to evacuate the passengers and return the aircraft to its original status. The drone aircraft, which took its place in the same colors, meanwhile, would continue to fly the filed flight plan. When over Cuba, the drone will be transmitting on the international distress frequency a Mayday message stating he is under attack by Cuban MiG aircraft. The transmission will be interrupted by destruction of the aircraft, which will be triggered by radio signal. This will allow International Civil Aviation Organization radio stations in the Western Hemisphere to tell the US what has happened to the aircraft instead of the US trying to sell the incident. So this is the mentality. When people say they would never do that, that was planned to happen. So the question is, what happened to the passengers? Well, they're talking there about, taking them off the plane, but are they going to let the passengers live? No. Not a chance, because of the consequences for exposure that would come from that. So they would have taken them out.
And I also highly recommend anyone who hasn't, look up Rebecca Roth. And I know Katie and Laura have been dropping some of these links in the chat. Rebecca Roth is a former flight attendant who started catching on to a lot of anomalous activity around the time of 9/11. And so she started doing a lot of investigation. And so she has written 4 novels in which that was her means of trying to stay safe while bringing out the information that she was discovering. So please check out Rebecca Roth. Okay. Another question that I see is how come no court case has been brought against the perpetrators for 9/11?
Well, I think the first answer to that, for reasons I've talked about, is they don't know who the perpetrators are. I mean, they've been told that the 19 Arab hijackers were the ones behind it. And because they were all connected, or overwhelmingly connected, to Saudi Arabia, the finger points to Saudi Arabia, which was involved, yes, but it wasn't the orchestrator. Israel and the deep state in America were the orchestrators. And when I say the deep state in America and the agencies of Israel, you're talking about the cult. You know, I mentioned earlier about in the public arena, you see these different organizations and they appear to be different. So you've got the CIA in America and you've got Mossad in Israel. But at the cult level, they're just different agencies of the same cult. They are actually the same organization at that level. So that's how it's done. The pressure, as we saw with the Hellerstein story, to stop people getting into court to have this put in the public arena is absolutely fantastic. I just want to mention one thing, Foster, just very quickly. I think it's important before we leave 9/11, is that how did they do it is a question. And I explain in the book how the cult, the Sabbatean cult, in league with its aspects in America, controlled the computer systems of every organization that it was necessary to control,
yes,
to control events on 9/11. This is why there was no response over more than 2 hours from any military aircraft to the hijackings, when normally it would have happened in minutes. This is why there was no ground-to-air defenses used when Flight 77 claimed was coming into the Pentagon. This is why there are no fly zones around these areas involved in the attacks, where if you go into them and you're not supposed to, then you are met with a response immediately. None of that happened. And there was tremendous miscommunication and non-communication between different agencies, and the NORAD, the response organization to hijackings, and in particular an area of NORAD called NEEDS, operates out of Rome in New York State, about 200 miles from Syracuse, which was orchestrating the responses. If you read their logs, they were absolutely confused by what they were seeing on their screens. There were planes that you thought shouldn't be there. There were planes that should be that weren't. You had these war games going on with similar scenarios to what actually happened in the same airspace. And in these war games, the blips of the war game aircraft were also on the screen. And what you find when you look into the background is that this takeover of the computer systems allowed real-time manipulation of what these NEEDS people were seeing on their screens. They were able to take out blips of planes that existed and put in blips of planes that didn't exist, creating this massive confusion. And there's a particular company called, it's gone now, called PTEC, which was a small company operating out of Quincy, Massachusetts, but managed to get the contracts to put its software in all these agencies that were, including the Federal Aviation Administration, that were operating the crucial areas that allowed 9/11 to happen and not be stopped. And PTEC was, on the face of it, an Arab organization. But when you do the research, and the guy called Christopher Bolin has done some magnificent research on 9/11, uncovered is that it was actually controlled by Israeli agencies. And in the 2 years before 9/11, P-Tech and something called the MITRE Corporation, which is a not-for-profit company operating in America, they were ensconced in the basement of the Federal Aviation Administration for 2 years before 9/11, working on the computer system and what they call interoperability. In other words, how these different systems in these different agencies connect with each other so they can communicate. And that allowed them total access to the entire system, to allow them to see where the holes were and to put holes in that weren't there, and to put in this foundation aspect of 9/11, which is what they call backdoors into computer systems. And the Israeli Mossad and the Israeli military specialize, even more so today, it's become massively expanded, but they specialize in something called cybersecurity. Because cybersecurity, we write security systems for computer systems, means you have access to the entire system. You have to, and you're writing the security system. So what you do is you write in backdoor access. So the Israeli Sabbatean cult and its expressions in America had access to these computer systems. And this is a quote from a book called Hijacking America's Mind on 9/11 by a researcher called Elias Davidson. A central feature of the simulated war games conducted on 9/11 was for the military to feed electronic blips representing airliners into military and civilian radar. These are known as input. As the events of 9/11 unfolded, radar operators had no way of knowing whether the blips they were observing on the screens represented real or simulated aircraft. There were, in fact, 3 types of blips the controllers had to confront: those representing virtual aircraft, possessing no physical existence; those representing real aircraft, which were scheduled to participate in the simulated hijackings; and all other blips representing real aircraft. And there was an IT consultant called Indira Singh who worked for some big companies, and she was the one that really focused on this P-Tech software company, because she couldn't work out why such a tiny company had all these contracts with all these agencies for their cybersecurity. And she was the one that pointed out that P-Tech and MITRE were in the basement of the FAA for 2 years before that, looking at interoperability and having control of the whole system. And she says this when she's explaining the potential implications for communication on that day between the FAA, the civilian operation, the Department of Defense, NORAD, the response system, etc., and the consequences of what was put into the system. Now, with the FAA in particular, she says, if something goes wrong and there is an emergency with a particular flight, and the DoD needs to be notified, well, that's a really major interoperability thing. A signal has to be sent in some way, shape or form, either mediated by a human in most cases or automatically. And even if it's mediated by a human, something needs to be initiated on a separate computer to start the whole sequence of events: intervention, scrambling a jet, notification up and downstream with many other organizations such as NORAD, such as other terminal radar areas, such as local law enforcement, you name it. So this all has to be blueprinted, mapped out, and that's where what they call enterprise architecture comes in. You need some kind of blueprint to keep all this together, and that's what P-Tech was good at. In other words, it wrote the blueprint for this interconnection with these backdoor access for live intervention, and they were able to control the whole system and uncovering what happened or unfolding what happened that day by controlling the computer system and the ability to communicate between different agencies.
Well, that's the same playbook that they have been using for the election fraud now. I did a show, if anybody hasn't seen it, back in July on the election fraud. All the forensic evidence is in now. It's massive. And it's the same thing. The Dominion computers were part of the deep state. They were taken over, and they set a trap for them, and they've got what they call these packet captures now, where they literally have the data from every county in the United States being put onto the internet, sent over to Spain and North Korea, and especially over 60% of it was sent to China, altered, sent back between 3 and 6 a.m. in the U.S. And then when people woke up to a whole different election, but it's the same people, same strategy. So as we're winding down on time, I want to ask you, David, for anybody who I think wants to know, I think this is a lot of compelling evidence, and the books and videos are all there, our movies, your books, your videos, and so forth. But I'd like you to reflect for a minute on what may be coming, because obviously they're not going to give up a false flag strategy as long as it's working for most people and allowing them to expand their power. So what should we be looking out for now?
Well, we go back to know the outcome and you'll see the journey. And part of the outcome is the transformation of the human form from what it is now to what they want it to be. And this connects enormous numbers of dots that are happening today. They want, I've been writing this for some considerable time. They want to transform, we'll call this human 1.0, the biological human, into a much more synthetic human, and a synthetic human that will not procreate. Aldous Huxley was talking about this in Brave New World in 1932. And again, there's two worlds. There's the world that the population live in, is the world that the cult live in, and they're completely different in terms of their levels of knowledge. So if people think, oh, that's crazy, how would Huxley know about this in 1932? Well, because the timeline projection of the cult is so different to the timeline knowledge of technology development known by the population, because the population only know about it when they see it, when it's introduced, whereas the cult knows what's coming. They know what's possible. So when Huxley was talking about artificial wombs and technological procreation of the species and the end of parenthood, he was knowing where this was planned to go. His family was very much an insider family into these networks. And so now we look at the events of now. Why are they putting synthetic genetic material into people in increasing numbers, boosters, the next one, through these fake vaccines? Why are they putting messenger RNA in these fake vaccines, which don't fulfill the definition of a vaccine? Because the body operates with a messaging system where the genetic system communicates with the brain, the brain communicates with the genetic system, and when that's in balance and harmony, we're well, we're healthy. When it's not, we have some form of dis-ease, disharmony. And so they're messing with the messaging system of the body. Now that immediately has potential for vast numbers of dis-ease, disharmonious expressions, including death and including very serious illness. But the infusion of the genetic material, which is self-replicating, it's becoming more and more impactful on the body the longer that the weeks pass, is designed to change the nature of the human form and into a no procreating human. Why is it that doctors with some self-respect and some backbone have pointed out how these fake vaccines are going to affect fertility, not least in women? And look at the sperm counts in men. There's a book recently come out detailing it all, especially in the Western world, but in general, they are absolutely plummeting, sperm counts, not least through cell phones in the pocket and the chemicals and stuff like that. What they're doing is they're phasing out human 1.0 that we know, and they're moving towards this human 2.0, this synthetic human, this no procreating human, And a lot of people won't make that transition. This is why this fake vaccine is so deadly. And those who do will have a different genetic state. This also explains why out of nowhere and suddenly everywhere came the transgender agenda. I've got some bad news for the transgender activists. This is not about you. This is not about transgender. This is about no gender. You are just being manipulated to be the transition. So they're targeting the young to confuse their perception of gender from a solid male-female to, well, endless expressions and claims of gender. And this is why they're putting drag queens into schools all over the world. So everyone all over the world had the same thought at the same time. I've got nothing against drag queens, do your own thing and, enjoy it, as long as you don't force it on anyone else. But why are they putting drag queens into schools with young kids? What is going to confuse the perception of gender of a child more than a drag queen? That's what it's meant to do, because the confusion is leading to the fusion of gender, which is the no gender, no procreating human. And this is why men are being targeted. This toxic masculinity. And I said years ago, they're going for the men now, they're going to go for the women next. And now you're seeing it turning on the women. Why? Because when you have a no gender human as your goal, you don't need men or women anymore, because you don't need them to procreate, because you've got another way of doing it with your technological system. And if people want to know what's planned, they just go and read Brave New World, certainly in this aspect of things, because that's exactly where it's going. What he was describing in terms of artificial wombs they've now being produced.
And let me interject for just a moment. But and for anyone for whom this is really new or startling, Kimberly is quite an expert on the movement toward transhumanism, and we did a whole month with some other experts, with John Hunt, Christian Pusateri, and Greg Braden a few months ago. Go to the Freedom Portal. There's free membership right now, a free trial, and watch those sections on transhumanism, and she lays out the evidence from the insiders themselves on what their plan is and how the seemingly irrational things that you're seeing going on today fit into that agenda. It's critical that we know, like David says, if you know where they're heading, then you can understand these crazy steps, and then we can do something to stop it.
Yeah, and so the idea, you talk about transhumanism there, well, this Human 2.0 is massively part of that, where the human brain and the human body system is connected to artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence becomes the human mind. Up to this point, they have had to manipulate perception by controlling information as best they can. They do it through censorship now, because perception becomes behavior. But the idea of connecting you to AI, hello, Mr. Musk, AI could be the end of humanity, and then you start a company called Neuralink to do just that. Thank you. If people think Elon Musk is a good guy, well, I think a reassessment might be in order. But so you have this point where the AI becomes the human mind directly, manipulation of information no longer necessary. This is where it's going. And this is why you're seeing Samsung come out in the last week talking about bringing in 6G and having like a cyberspace avatar review. They're drawing you into the cyberspace to actually completely control your mind. And they need the synthetic human ultimately to be part of this system. So that's where it's going to be moving if we allow it to happen. This is why, against all scientific evidence, even if you believe in the virus, and they've never shown it to exist, staggering, people might find that, they never have, they're putting this fake jab into kids, into smaller and smaller kids. Why? Why does Gates say we have to vaccinate every man, woman, and child on the planet? for a virus that even if you believe in it and look at the evidence, you won't, is fatal to so few people. And as you go to younger age groups, virtually not at all. Why do you have to do it to every man, woman, and child on the planet? Because they've got to get this synthetic genetic material into everyone on the planet. That's why people who are awakening, I keep saying, there is no consequence that they can threaten you with if you don't have this fake jab that is more sinister, more life-ending, or dramatically life-changing than the decision to have the jab. I mean, that's the decision that will decide the future.
Yeah.
And there's nothing they can intimidate you with which will give you more sinister consequences than having the jab.
Yes. And we're winding down on time, and you've been really generous with your time. I know you're still busy the rest of your day. So I want to make sure that you just highlight what's the best way for people to find you and to continue their learning from you. I know the trigger is on sale, but I know you've got a new book, and tell us about your live stream that's coming up.
Yeah, the new book, which has just arrived in America, it was published in Britain a couple of months ago, but trying to get container shipping space to move goods at the moment is a nightmare. So it's just in America. It's called Perceptions of a Renegade Mind. It's very topical. It's very much about topical events, but it's also about a renegade mind. And what is a renegade mind? A renegade mind is not just a mind that critically thinks and sees. It's a mind that critically thinks, sees, and then says, I'm not cooperating with what I see. And it's that next step that is vital now, Foster, that people move from seeing it to ceasing to cooperate with it. It's absolutely vital, because when they move into this next lockdown that they're planning at some point in the next few, in the time in front of us, they're planning that to be the last lockdown. They don't want to come out of that one. And you look at the extremes of the lockdown now in Australia. That's what they want all over the world, and it's the pushback that will decide if they get it or not. The non-cooperation that will decide if they get it or not. And that's why it really is time now to stiffen the backbone and refuse to cooperate with tyranny. Because there's one thing that's absolutely guaranteed: if you cooperate with tyranny, you get tyranny. Guaranteed. And not to give a centimeter. Not to give a centimeter. Not you give a centimeter, you'll give an inch. You give an inch, you'll give a foot. You give a foot, you'll give a yard. You'll give a mile eventually in stages. So when this started in the spring of 2020, or this lockdown, I made the decision I'm not cooperating with any of it. Yeah. Not doing any of it. And I've not cooperated with any of their restrictions. None of them. Never worn a face nappy, will not do it. Face diaper, won't do it. No one's going to tell me what I put on my face. Who the hell do you think you are? I wouldn't dream of telling you what to put on your face. And you're telling me what? Not having it. Self-respect won't allow it. Well, we'll do this. We'll do it then, because I'm still not doing it. And this is the line in the sand that is absolutely vital now.
So tell us about this event you've got coming up in November.
Yes, November the 6th. It's on Iconic, which is our media platform. It's like an alternative Netflix, if you like. All the alternative subjects are covered. I'm doing a live stream for 6 hours on the 6th of November, and it's called Where From Here. And it is all about where from here. Where from here? Well, that's the choice we're about to make. And we better make the right one.
Yeah. So is there any kind of final message for this particular interlude that you want to leave our audience with?
I would say, remember who you are, and let go of the phantom self that you've been told all your life that you are. They want you to self-identify with the experiences of a human life, because then they gotcha. Because if you self-identify with the labels of a human life, you are by definition immediately self-identifying with limitation. with I can't, with it's not possible. And if you remember who you are and you move that sense of self identity into consciousness, the infinite, eternal consciousness is having a constant experiencing, infinitely, then everything changes, because you realize that because energy is malleable and consciousness can manifest whatever it chooses, if it takes the power to choose it, then this 5 sense perception that this is a dense, solid world and everything has to change slowly. How are we going to turn this around? Well, when you realize that your perception becomes your experience reality, and that reality is malleable to that perception, then you realize that actually it's not going to take forever to turn it around. What is human society today? It is human behavior. What is human behavior? It's human perception made manifest. Change perception, you change behavior. Change behavior, you change human society. We could have had a big blazing row here, Foster. It was a choice. We could have made that choice. We made a different choice. So we had a lovely experience. Choice. What is life? It's choice and consequence. Choice and consequence. Choice and consequence. You make a choice, you take a consequence. If you don't like the consequence, you then make different choices. If you like the choice, the consequence, you make the same choice and you carry on liking it. But it's choice leading to consequence, choice and consequence, choice and consequence. And therefore, our choices are our power to impact upon our life and our life experience. They were able to lock down billions of people because they made the choice to believe what they were being told. Those that made a different choice did not have the same experience. All these people that have followed the restrictions, I've not followed any of them. I never will. So, my life's just gone on. It's not changed really, because I've not made the choice to do what I'm told by morons and psychopaths. It's a choice, and it's all about choice and consequence, choice and consequence. And here's a choice. How do a few people control the world? Well, it's a very simple sequence of imposition and acquiescence. And it's a good point to leave it here with this thought. You think of a pyramid of the global hierarchy. At the top of the pyramid is this tiny inner core of the cult, which even most of the cult doesn't know who it is. And it imposes its will on the level below them, which acquiesces to that will and imposes it on the level below them. And very soon after you come down from that pyramid peak, you're meeting levels of the pyramid who have no idea there even is a cult. All they're doing at their different levels of the pyramid is taking instruction from the level above them, acquiescing to it, and imposing it on the level below them. This is how the whole COVID hoax has been played out. Just look at it. And then you come down, imposition, acquiescence, imposition, acquiescence, imposition, acquiescence. And eventually you come to the bottom of the pyramid where the mass of the population are. And if we, as a human population, acquiesce with the impositions of that level of the pyramid seeking to impose on us, which is governments and authorities and health people and law enforcement, we cooperate with them when it means cooperating with our own enslavement, then we complete a circuit between the tiny few at the top of the pyramid and the mass of the population. And that circuit of imposition and acquiescence means that this tiny number of people that ultimately you'd get in one room has imposed its will on the entirety of the human population, simply through imposition followed by acquiescence. And, you can look for solutions to a problem, or you can be wise and remove the cause of it. Because you remove the cause, the problem must disappear. And the cause is human acquiescence to authority, no matter what it imposes. It's human acquiescence with our own enslavement. You look all the way through human history, and you'll see the same sequence of the tiny few controlling the very many, for the very many acquiescing to the demands of the few. And yet, I stood at the side of a field once, and I saw this massive, massive flock of sheep coming down. And there was a shepherd with his stick in the front, and there was a sheepdog. And there was a massive number of sheep. And they're all following the shepherd, because that's what they do. They've been taught to follow the shepherd. And any sheep that wanted to break out of the group, then the sheepdog, symbolizing fear, went and sorted them out, and they all went along. And I stood there and I thought, what if those sheep all went off in different directions now? They said, well, I'm not following the shepherd anymore. I'm fed up with it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to be my own uniqueness. And I'm going over here. I like it over here. I've never seen over here. Let's go see what's there. Oh, well, I'm going over here. I'm going over there. The all-powerful shepherd, symbolic of this cult and authority, would be standing there thinking, well, what the hell do I do now? Well, there's nothing you can do.
Right.
And the sheepdog, you bark all your life, mate. I'm still not doing it. Yeah. No power. The flock that was following is now gone. All control of it is gone. And the mathematics are so blatant. When we started these protests in Britain, in London, places like that, over this COVID hoax, there was a few people turned up, and the police were straight in and sorted it out. Now, hundreds of thousands of people march through London, once a month, sometimes twice. And the police just stand there, watch them go past. Can't do anything. Because they're the sheepdog and the shepherd now.
And if anybody listening has not seen David's recent Trafalgar Square speech, ladies, please put that link in the chat and go see that. Particularly if you're feeling down someday, you need a little inspiration. It is phenomenal. It's hard for me to wrap up this conversation. I would love to continue going, but I don't want to violate your generosity here. I want to let people know out there that in addition to this information, in addition to the spiritual space, we also need to be able to collaborate really effectively. And Kimberly and I have been working with our team for 9 months on this Solutions Hub. You're seeing here, this is an example of the Freedom Portal. This is where we go deeper in the conversation. And as people are ready, as they get sufficiently informed, sufficiently motivated, then they want to take action. That's what we've designed, a global, decentralized, open source, and secure platform for finding other freedom lovers and truth seekers, collaborating your efforts around ethical principles. And it's in beta right now. We've just, over the last few days, we've just welcomed Freedom Portal members to join for the first time. There's hundreds of individuals and over 50 groups. We haven't opened it to the public yet. We've been wanting to fine tune it, but the need is so great right now that we are opening it up to Freedom Portal members. And hopefully within the next couple of months, we'll be ready to open it up to the general public, because understanding is fantastic. Motivation is necessary, but ultimately, as David says, you've got to move the understanding into action. So, David, I want to say you are a phenomenal being. It's an honor to know you. It's a privilege to have had you on this show. We will look forward to the next time. And meanwhile, let us know. Feel free to send me a message anytime that you need help getting some message out, when your book's ready, when your talk on November 6th is coming up. We want to help you spread the word, because it's about truth, and it's about love, and it's about who we truly are. So thank you, sir.
Real pleasure. Thanks. It's always a pleasure, Foster. Thanks very much.
All right. We'll see you all. Thanks for making this whole thing possible, and for having the courage to really listen and open your heart and your mind. See you next time.